Section 25 of Music by Ursula Creighton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 25, Some Russian Composers. During Liszt's years in Weimar, much music was brought to his notice, music by new composers and from different countries. Music by Russian composers was then hardly known outside Russia, until Berlioz produced some works by Glinka, and Liszt played compositions by Borodin and Balakirev. Glinka, 1803 to 1857, was the earliest Russian composer of this time whose work did not imitate the Italian opera prevalent at the Russian court. His aim was to produce music that was really Russian. Russia was a storehouse of folk melodies. The peasants and workmen of every kind had numberless songs, those from one part of Russia varying very much from those of another part of that large country. Many of these have now been collected, and some are well known. Glinka had heard much of this Russian folk music in his youth from the peasants at his father's country home, and when he settled in St. Petersburg in 1834, he determined to produce Russian music founded on Russian melodies and their rhythms and really national in character. He had a group of friends whose aims were like his own, among them the now well-known writers Pushkin and Gogol. Glinka studied all the different music he could, both German and Italian, in order to acquire facility in writing and so be able to carry out his aim. His first great work was an opera, A Life for the Tsar, the libretto based on a story taken from Russian history and the music founded on Russian folk song. It became very popular, and Glinka continued writing other operatic and orchestral works with the same ideals and added power. Among his friends were several younger men who carried on his aims. The earliest of them is Balakirev. Balakirev, 1837 to 1910, was a cultivated musician who exercised a great influence on his contemporaries, Borodin, Mussorgsky, and Rimsky-Korsakov. Living in St. Petersburg, he was the center of a group of musicians who each, in his own way, wished to produce national music, and who succeeded so well that their works had an originality and power which has made many of them known and liked all over Europe. Balakirev himself wrote beautiful songs. His most famous work is a symphonic poem, Tamar, which he dedicated to Liszt, and a piano fantaisie, Islamez, often played by Liszt. Not only was he a power among his friends and a composer of many beautiful works, but he founded the Free School of Music in St. Petersburg and started a series of concerts for poor people, for the prices of tickets for orchestral concerts in Russia were so high that no poor person could afford to buy them. One of Balakirev's pupils and his great admirer was Borodin, 1834 to 1887. His first symphony, written after he had been studying with Balakirev, made his name famous in Germany, and Liszt wrote to him praising it. Borodin wrote lovely songs and other works. His best-known composition is his opera Prince Igor. He was not interested in recitative. He liked melody and straightforward, simple music, and Prince Igor is full of such music, and it has had a great popularity. The most original and the most gifted of these Russian composers was Mussorgsky, 1839 to 1881. His two best-known works are his operas Boris Godunov and Kovanchina. They are realistic pictures of that unchanging Russian life which English people know vividly from Russian writers. What to us is an almost barbarous tyranny, the inevitable rebellion against it, religious fervor of a kind unknown in more educated nations, all these are expressed vividly and realistically, and the emotion underlying the everyday life of most simple people is conveyed with a force and directness that Mussorgsky alone has ever produced. Two other Russian composers of this time are well known, Tchaikovsky and Anton Rubinstein. These two had not the same aims as the friends and followers of Glinka and Balakirev. Tchaikovsky, 1840 to 1893, whose work was famous all over Europe long before he died, was not interested in Russian music until he was grown up. He loved Italian opera and he adored Mozart. It was not until he was 21 that he first began to study composition seriously and realized that music was to be his life's work. And in 1863, when he gave up his post in the Ministry of Justice, he had to face real poverty while he devoted himself to his art. He had, however, good friends. He was soon appointed professor at the Conservatorium in Moscow by the head, Nicholas Rubinstein, who produced all his compositions as they were written. Tchaikovsky traveled a great deal. He came several times to England, as well as visiting other European countries. Whenever he left Russia, he suffered from homesickness and was always glad to get back to his own country and the little country house which for years he had longed to possess. He had a very emotional personality, and it is this that comes out in his works. The Pathetic Symphony and the B-flat minor piano concerto have an almost realistic emotional intensity. They are among his best-known works. But others, which are perhaps equally popular and more beloved, are those of lyrical beauty. The Casse-Noisette Suite and his opera Eugene Onegin. His chamber music, his symphonies, and overtures are still heard at concerts, and there is a certain warm, sensuous vividness about them that gives them a direct appeal. Anton Rubinstein, 1830 to 1894, was one of the greatest pianists the world has ever known. From the age of 9, he played in public. At the age of 18, he was appointed court pianist, and he constantly went on concert tours. He was famous as a pianist and composer all over Europe and America, and though his compositions are not now considered very important, his playing must have been wonderful. He had such power over his instrument and was able to convey so vividly the feeling of what he played that he always roused his audience to enthusiasm. He wrote many operas which are now not heard, but some of his songs have real beauty, and some of his pieces for piano show his great mastery of the instrument. Two later Russian composers have become well known in the present day, Scriabin and Stravinsky. Scriabin won fame as a pianist and wrote a good deal for his instrument. He produced music which is often beautiful in sound, though the feeling does not seem very interesting, and his work sometimes sounds disconnected. It is like meeting well-known feelings, not specially moving, but in lovely modern dress. Stravinsky has become known through his music for ballets. This music has imaginative charm, but his other orchestral work, while it shows how complete is his command of orchestral effect, also shows his lack of personal aim or ideal. Some of it gives the impression of a retrograde movement in art, expressing sensuous force without beauty of feeling or gaiety of spirit, and his music for ballets remains the most interesting that he has produced. Music has special characteristics, among them the power to give pleasure and to arouse states of mind. But the kind of pleasure produced by such sounds as excite a Negro warrior to frenzied and passionate acts can certainly not be compared favorably with the kind of pleasure produced by really lovely sound, such as a melody of a folk song or a Mozart aria. Though these seem the extremes of musical expression, ordinary listeners who care for musical sound can find in modern music similar differences of quality, if not quite so extreme, and realize, quite apart from a composer's power to convey emotion, a sense of what underlies his music and whether it has a true poetic beauty or not. End of section 25 of Music by Ursula Creighton, read by Martha Weller, Champaign, Illinois, March 30th, 2024.